The brutal warrior Kratos is a servant of the Olympian gods. Tormented by nightmares of the past and longing for freedom, the ghost of Sparta would do anything to redeem himself from the debt he owes to the gods. When he has almost lost all hope, they entrust him with one last mission that will put an end to his slavery. He must destroy Ares, the god of war. But what chance does a mere mortal have of winning his battle? Armed with the deadly blades of chaos, guided by the goddess Athena and driven by his own desire for revenge, Kratos seeks the only truly powerful relic to assassinate Ares. A search that will take him deep into the mysterious temple located on the back of the titan Cronus. From the dark depths of Hades, through war-torn Athens, to beyond the desert of lost souls, God of War delves into the legend of Kratos. Prologue. He stands on the edge of nameless cliffs, like a marble statue, pale as the clouds in the sky. He cannot see the colors of life, nor the scarlet scars of his own tattoos, nor the shreds of rotting flesh on his wrists, from which his chains were torn. His eyes, as black as the Aegean, churning at his feet, contrast with the face whiter than the foam that boils between the pointed stones. Ashes, only ashes, despair and the scourge of winter rain, that is the payment for 10 years of service to the gods. Ashes, rot and a cold and lonely death. Now he only dreams of oblivion. They have called him the ghost of Sparta. He has been called the fist of Ares and the paladin of Athena. They have called him a warrior, a murderer, a monster. It is all of those things and none of them. His name is Kratos, and he knows who the real monsters are. His arms hang with the powerful muscles stiffened, now useless. His hands are calloused, not only from the Spartan sword and javelin, but from the swords of chaos, the trident of Poseidon, and even the legendary thunderbolt of Zeus. His hands have claimed more lives than Kratos has breathed, but now they hold no weapon. Your hands will no longer flex or clench into a fist. All they feel is the slow drip of blood and pus from their torn wrists. Their wrists and forearms are the true symbol of their service to the gods. The shreds of flesh swing, swayed by the cruel wind, blackened and putrid. Even the bone shows the scars of the chains that were fused to it, the chains of the swords of chaos. The chains have disappeared, worn off by the same God who gave them to him. Those chains not only linked him to the swords and the swords to him, they also chained him to the service of the gods. But that service was over. The chains and the swords with them were gone. He has nothing left. It's nothing anymore. What he has not abandoned, he has rejected. He has no friends, he is feared and hated throughout the known world, and no living being feels love or even a little affection for him. No enemies, he has none left to kill, no family. That is still a place in his heart where he does not dare to look. And finally, the last refuge of the lost and the lonely, the gods. The gods have made a fool of him. They took him in, molded him, turned him into a man he can no longer stand to be. And now, in the end, he can't even express his anger anymore. The gods of Olympus have abandoned me. He walks the last few inches of the cliff, his sandals pushing some gravel down the cliff. 1,000 feet below, dirty wisps of cloud twist and weave a web of mist between him and the jagged rocks against which the Aegean crashes. A network. He shakes his head. A network. In any case, a shroud. He has done more than any mortal could have done. He has accomplished feats that not even the gods themselves could match. But nothing has freed him from his pain. A past from which he cannot escape returns to him, torment and madness, his only companions. There is no hope. There is no hope in this world, but in the other, within the limits of the mighty Styx that marks the borders of Hades, flows the Lethe. They say that the sip of its dark waters erases the memory of the life that a shadow has left behind and allows the soul to wander eternally nameless and homeless. No past. That dream makes him take the last step forward, which makes him fall and pass through the clouds that are tearing apart around him. The rocks, battered by the sea, become larger and more solid and seem to advance towards him to crush him. The impact engulfs everything he is, everything he has been, everything he has done and everything that has been done to him in a devastating burst of darkness. The goddess Athena, dressed from top to bottom in armor, stood before her burnished bronze mirror. He put an arrow on the bow and pulled the string slowly. He watched every last movement in the mirror to adopt the correct posture. Athena raised her right elbow slightly. Any deviation from the correct angle would cause the arrow to deviate from its path. She sought perfection in all things, as befitted a warrior goddess. He tightened the rope and felt the muscles in his arms and shoulders tighten in unison. That sensation encouraged her and made her aware not only of herself, but also of everything around her. He turned around, looked in the mirror, corrected his posture slightly and pointed to the other end of his chambers, at a huge tapestry depicting the fall of Troy. His fingers released the arrow, which shot out and stuck in the thread figure of Paris. What a flawed hero, he thought. I hadn't chosen so badly. He had risked a lot, as the fate of Olympus hung in the balance when his brother Ares lost control. Had Kratos experienced a moment of doubt like that, just before the arrow shot from the bow? Doubt? Security? Unusually, he felt a stab of fear. Had all his scheming been for nothing after depriving Ares of his services with a clever ruse? A small gust of air made him turn. He rested another arrow on the string and pulled until the golden bow groaned from the strain. He thought better of it and slowly relaxed it without actually launching the arrow. Lounging half-naked on his wine-red cloud couch, without the slightest hint of shame, lay an incredibly handsome young man. His mischievous smile was not affected by having Athena's arrow pointed at his forehead. "I'm glad to see you," he said. "Are you celebrating your victory? You know what would make this occasion really special, getting rid of your perpetual virginity. Don't look so solemn. Don't be so solemn. Let's explore unknown territories. As an explorer I am very good, and I can show you new paths." "Hermes," she whispered. "Didn't I warn you not to spy on me in my chambers?" "Surely," said the messenger of the gods lazily. He rubbed his bare back against the couch, moving sinuously with pleasure. "Ah, how wonderful! What an itch it was! In fact, my sister, it is not my only itch, but you can help me with this one, since it is you who inspires it." "I?" Athena's face remained unchanged like a marble statue. "Do you want me to scratch you with my sword?" The bow in his hand vanished and a sharp sword appeared in its place. Hermes lay back on the couch. He interlaced his fingers behind his head and addressed the sky over Olympus movingly. "I am condemned to look at what I cannot touch," he said with a sigh. Such a cruel fate should be reserved for mortals. Athena had learned through centuries of experience that Hermes was so intoxicated by his own charms that when he began to flirt, the only way to divert him from his purpose was to change the subject. With the sword he pointed at his sandals. "You have wings. Is this an official message?" "Official? Oh, no. Zeus is out there doing something," he replied, and smiled evilly. "Although it is more likely that he is doing someone to another mortal girl. Surely, only the fates know. Seriously, I don't know what he sees in those mortal women, when any god would sacrifice one or two immortal limbs in exchange for a peek under his robe." "The message," Athena cut him off. "What excuse do you have for invading my chambers?" "Oh, of course I have a message." He took out the caduceus and waved it at her. "Really? Do you see it? I have the rod. Your beauty gives you the impression of charm, but your manners make it dissipate." "Oh, I guess that was a clever comment, right? I ask you, dear Virgin of War, because otherwise, there would be no way to know. Let me answer you with another question. Is the message you bring so important that I shouldn't kill you for getting on my nerves? Please. Our Father forbids one god to kill another." His voice trailed off as he perceived something uncomfortable in his cold gray gaze. "Athena, dear sister, you know that in reality I am completely harmless. I haven't stopped repeating it to myself. Until now. I was just trying to have a little fun. A pinch. A little joke with my favorite sister. To cheer you up, you know. To distract you from, well, you know. Of course I know. And you shouldn't forget it either. He glanced at a dressing table where there was a gold hoop studded with precious stones. Yet another trinket made for an expiatory offering by some ambitious craftsman from the city that bore his name. For a mortal's work, it was quite refined. I thought I should probably answer his prayer, and I would have if I had remembered his name. Her problems with Ares had separated her from those mortals who trusted her so much even when they died. That had to change soon, if he wanted to repair more than just destroyed buildings. Aunt. Oh. I apologize for spying on you. Of all the Olympian goddesses, you are the most beautiful. Your posture with the bow curve and the string intention was elegant. No, perfect. A gift for the eyes. Every enemy would tremble and every ally would embrace your cause. Hermes got up from the couch and stretched his muscles with the intention of showing off his young and agile body. But you must admit that, of all the gods, I am the most handsome. If you were half as handsome as you think, you would shine brighter than the sun. Do you see it? No one can compare to me. I'd like to hear you say it in front of Apollo. Hermes threw his head back haughtily. Oh, he's quite handsome. But he's a glanders. The next words you say better have to do with your message. She leaned toward him and touched his chest with the tip of the sword. I think it's been a long time since you witnessed the consequences of making me angry. The messenger of the gods looked at the sword resting on his ribs and then looked at the gray eyes of the goddess of war, which were staring at him. He stood up, smoothed his chlamys with a very dignified gesture and said in a loud and clear tone, "He's your favorite mortal. Kratos." Athena frowned. Zeus had said that he would take care of Kratos himself until after the memorial service. What's wrong with him? I thought you would like to know, given how much he has helped you and how much you care about him. Hermes. The messenger shuddered slightly. Yes. Look. He raised the caduceus and pointed to a point. In the air between them, the image of a towering mountain and a sheer cliff formed, far from the churning surface of the Aegean. At the edge of the cliff, Kratos stopped and seemed to speak, although there was no one to hear him. Your favorite has chosen a dangerous path that will take him to Hades. Athena turned pale. Are you going to commit suicide? It seems so. Impossible. That disobedient mortal. And where was Zeus? Taking care of Kratos? No, obviously. Had he said that he would only take care of him? Athena now thought. That was something totally different. As he mentally reviewed all the possibilities and improbabilities, the Kratos in the image leaned forward and raised one foot as if he were going to jump off the cliff, and fell. It just fell. He didn't fight, scream, or ask for help. He plunged headlong towards certain death against the rocks with a calm face. Didn't you see it coming? Hermes asked with a smile. Aren't you supposed to be the goddess of foresight? She looked at him so seriously that he suppressed his smile with a cough. The next time we meet, he said quietly, coldly, I will share with you what I foresee for you. Hey! I was joking. He swallowed. It was just a joke. And that's why I didn't think it was necessary to hurt you. Still, his sword cut the air in front of Hermes's nose. To be honest, the courier didn't flinch. Too much. Athena left her chambers angrily. Hermes gaped. At the speed of thought, he descended from Mount Olympus to the rain-lashed cliffs. It arrived as Kratos was passing through the tattered clouds. The messenger was right. I would never have thought that suicide would be the end of Kratos' story. How could she have been so blind? How could Zeus have let it happen? And more importantly, how could Kratos be so disobedient? The marine graveyard, he thought. There the fall of Kratos had begun. It had to be there. The marine cemetery and the Aegean Sea. The entire ship groaned and shuddered and lurched its bow up against the fierce winter storm as if it had run aground against an unexpected shoal in the depths of the Aegean. Kratos hugged the figure of Athena on the bow of his battered ship, and as he opened his mouth he uttered an animalistic growl. Up on the main mast, the last of the ship's square sails was splitting, billowing from the gale. It sounded like lightning had struck nearby. A flock of filthy, emaciated creatures, like hideous women with bat wings, swooped down and hovered above the mast, screaming in rage and thirsting for human blood. Harpies, Kratos growled. I hated harpies. A pair of winged monsters screamed above the howling wind as they swooped down to slash the sail with their blood-soaked talons. The sail flapped once more and ended up cracking. As he fell on the deck he knocked down the harpies. One disappeared in the foam of the waves and the other managed to right itself by hooking the hair of an oarsman with its sharp claws. It flew away at the unfortunate sailor, who was screaming and struggling high above, and twisted itself to sink its fangs into his neck and feast on his blood, which gushed out and fell in the form of a bloody rain. The harpy saw Kratos looking at her and screamed in ancient rage. He tore off the sailor's head and threw it at Kratos. When he deflected the grisly missile with a contemptuous backhand, the monster threw the sailor's body at him with enough force to kill a normal man. But his target was no ordinary man. Kratos dodged and took the rope belt off the headless sailor as he fell. With a strong tug he broke the rope and threw the body overboard, which fell into the churning sea. Kratos gauged the path of the harpy as it swooped down on him like a hawk, sharp talons outstretched to tear out his eyes. He instinctively put his hands on his shoulders, reaching for the enormous, sinisterly curved, sharp, unearthly twin swords he carried on his back. Their weapons, the swords of chaos, had been forged by Hephaestus, the blacksmith god, in the forge of Hades. Chains emerged from its handles that trapped around his wrists and burned his flesh until it melted with his bones. But at the last moment he left the twin weapons where they were. It wasn't worth drawing them for a harpy. Like a whip, he cracked the sailor's belt, which snaked until it found the harpy and wrapped around his neck. He jumped from the figurehead to the deck and dragged the creature with his weight. He pinned her to the ground with one foot while he pulled the rope upward with a fraction of his strength. It was enough. The harpies had separated from its body and flew into the air. Kratos grabbed the head with his free hand, waved it for the rest of the flock to see, screeching and fluttering above his head, and bellowed, "Come down again. You see what awaits you." He emphasized his challenge by launching the severed head with deadly accuracy and incredible strength at the nearest harpy. It hit her square inches the face and cut her scream short as if it were an axe. The harpy fell struggling and crashed into the choppy sea, 3 spans from the port doors. Kratos just frowned. Killing those disgusting creatures wasn't even fun. It wasn't even a challenge. Kratos' brow furrowed further as the storm gave him a glimpse of the merchant ship he was chasing. The ship still had 2 sails left and was moving away with the wind in its favor. It only took him a second to understand why his boat was falling behind. Its rowers were cowering in fear, terrified of the harpies, and were trying to hide as best they could under the benches or take cover behind the thickness of the oars. With the wordless growl, Kratos grabbed a frightened oarsman by the hide and, with one hand, lifted the man over his head. "The only monster you should fear is me." With a quick movement of his wrist, carried out without apparent effort, he threw the coward into the sea. "And now, row." The surviving rowers took their places and began rowing frantically. There was only one thing Kratos hated more than harpies: a coward. "And you," he threatened the helmsman with his enormous fist. "If I have to come back to rule them, I'll feed you to the harpies. Do you see the boat?" His roar made the helmsman tremble. "Yes or no?" "A quarter of a league from the bow, to starboard," answered the helmsman. "But keep the candles. We will never reach it." "We will reach it." Kratos had been chasing the merchant ship for several days. The other captain was a skilled and sagacious sailor. He had tried every trick known to Kratos and then some, but each day Kratos' sleek galley pushed the merchant ship ineluctably toward the one danger no ship could escape, the sea graveyard. Kratos knew that, sooner or later, his prey had to realize it. Entering that cursed strait was the last mistake any captain could make in his life. In front of them, imposing like peak rocks in the middle of the narrow strait, lay the shattered hulls of countless ships that, by bad luck or by miscalculation, had reached that place. No one knew how many were there, hundreds, perhaps thousands, listing in the tides and treacherous countercurrents, hulls scraping against each other until they finally broke and splintered into floating planks or filled with water and sank. But the danger did not end there. So many shipwrecked ships were piled up at the bottom of the sea that they reached almost to the surface of the Aegean in the form of artificial reefs, lying in wait for some ill-fated ship to open its hull. It was impossible to draw a map of those reefs, since no ship that had entered the cemetery had left it. So many sailors had died there that the sea stank of rotting flesh. Kratos nodded as he watched the merchant ship lower its sails and raise its oars to turn around. He could escape, or he could have escaped in any other sea region, but the ship was already too close to the sea graveyard. As the merchant ship began to change course, a huge head rose from the depths and fell on the deck of the ship. Then his wiry neck wrapped around the master and tried to break it. As the wind momentarily calmed, Kratos could clearly hear the roars and war cries of the merchant ship's crew as they frantically attacked the Hydra's neck with short swords and fire axes. More heads emerged from the depths. Kratos ordered the helmsman to head towards them. There was no point in waiting for them to escape. They were too busy fighting the Hydra to notice that they were being pushed towards the grave. Around them floated the abandoned and destroyed hulls of ships that either had not enjoyed the protection of the gods or were predestined to suffer that fate. They passed a ship that could not have arrived much before Kratos and his quarry. A dozen sailors were impaled on the mast, pierced by an immense spear. The harpies had pecked at their corpses. Almost all of the sailors were left with little more than shreds of flesh hanging from bloody skeletons, but the one closest to the mast was still alive. The sailor saw Kratos and began kicking limply while extending his hands for help with a silent gesture. Kratos was more interested in that immense spear. Its presence made one suspect that a Cyclops could be nearby. He stood in front of the helmsman so that he would not see the ship of death. "Don't neglect your direction. We have Ares against us," said the sailor with the broken voice. "The Harpies, the Hydra, are now his creatures. All. Do you want to challenge the god of war?" Kratos slapped him hard enough to knock him onto the deck. "That merchant ship has fresh water. We have to tackle it before it sinks, or we will all die drinking sea water. Forget Ares, it's Poseidon you should worry about." He helped him to his feet and placed him at the helm. "And if Poseidon doesn't worry you, you always have me." They had been without water for 2 days. His mouth was drier than the desert of lost souls and his tongue was swollen. Kratos would have gladly exchanged the water for something else, but before he had the chance, the captain of the merchant ship spotted him and decided that it was wiser to flee, as if all the dogs of Hades were on his heels. Kratos was going to teach that captain the consequences of such good sense. He pulled at his beard, short and pointed, to remove some clots of harpy or human blood. He neither knew nor cared. He checked for injuries. In the heat of battle one can be mortally wounded without realizing it. Finding none, his fingers unconsciously ran over the red tattoo that crossed his face and shaved head and down his back. The red contrasted with the color of his skin, white as bone. Blood and death, those were the hallmarks of Kratos. No one who had seen him fight, no one who had heard of his legendary exploits would have confused him with any other man. Another impact caused Kratos to crash into the helmsman. The ship shook and a long creaking sound was heard. The sailor fell to the deck and Kratos grabbed the wheel, which spun freely in his hands. "The rudder!" exclaimed the helmsman. "It's broken." Kratos let go of the useless rudder and looked over the stern. One of the abandoned hulls that made up the reef of ships had harpooned his galley as if it were a fish. A mast as thick as his body had passed through the hull and destroyed the rudder as it entered the stern from below. "Starboard rowers, row back," Kratos bellowed. "Port rowers, row if you want to save your useless lives." With a loud crack, the galley broke free of the mast. As the boat turned toward the struggling merchant ship, Kratos ordered the starboard rowers to row forward with all their might. He turned around and shouted to the helmsman, "Set the rhythm. And make it quick. But we are sinking. Do it." Kratos turned to the oarsmen and shouted, "The first cowardly worm to let go of the oar will die on the spot." Although the stern sank more and more, the galley managed to move forward. The merchant ship was only about 200 paces away, then 150, then a strong swell, caused by the treacherous countercurrents of the marine graveyard, caused the galley to list and, instead of righting itself, it collided with the rotting hull and became stuck to it. Kratos' ship could only go in one direction, down. "If you can, follow me," Kratos said to the crew. If they couldn't, they weren't worth saving. He jumped overboard and landed on his feet on a slippery board. He skidded and waved his arms to keep his balance. The waves rocked the driftwood, and each wave caused the abandoned hulls to rub against each other like wooden millstones. Falling into those waters meant certain death. 50 feet ahead another ship was pitching. Its mast had been torn off, and judging by the layer of barnacles and blackened seaweed that adorned its hull, the ship had been a prisoner of the marine graveyard for many years. Any floating object was better than his galley, which the sea was already engulfing with a loud sucking sound that added to the chorus of screams from the sailors who had been too slow to jump. A second later, all that could be heard were the crashing waves and the faint whistle of the gale, which was now subsiding. Moving quickly over the wreckage of ships, Kratos reached the abandoned vessel. The steep curve of the slippery hull seemed impossible to climb, even for him. He stopped and looked back to see if any of his crew members were following him. Only a few had managed to avoid sinking with the galley. Suddenly, a hydra head rose from the depths and, with a savage bite, claimed the lives of more, cutting them in two. Kratos watched them die in silence. He was used to being alone. The mast he was balancing on unexpectedly rolled under his feet. He jumped without hesitation and his fingers searched desperately for the anchor chain under the scab of the hull. The barnacles cut his fingers, but Kratos screamed and held on even tighter. His feet adjusted to the curve of the hull and he began to carefully climb, holding on to the chain, until he reached the deck. The ship had been abandoned for years. The mast had broken and splintered, although storms and waves had smoothed its edges. He turned around and looked at the spot where his ship had been. He saw nothing but gray waves and foam almost as white as his ash-stained skin. The first warning was the stench of decomposing flesh. The second was that the chains fused to the bones of his wrists began to burn. Ares had been a cruel lord. Kratos couldn't even bear to think about him, except for one thing. The god of war had cast the swords of chaos into his arms. The embedded chains burned as if they were hanging over a bonfire. Drops of fire fell from the swords on his back, but this time he didn't bother to draw them either. He turned around and got into a fighting stance, hands open to grab and tear. The stench became putrid. It came from 3 of Ares' soldiers, rotting corpses of undead legionnaires. They were the only soldiers that the god of war could now command. A cold green fire shone in his eyes. Decaying flesh hung in tatters from their bones. They pounced on him without saying a word. Despite being undead, they moved at an astonishing speed. One tried to stab him in the head with a spear, hoping to force him to dodge it, while another tried to immobilize his legs with a chain that he spun in circles. He grabbed the handle of the spear with both hands and pulled it down so that the chain wound around it. Kratos then dropped the spear and plunged his hand into the slimy entrails of the nearest legionnaire. With his fingers he tore through the rotting flesh to grab the inside of the hip bone. Kratos squeezed with inhuman strength. The legionnaire's hip shattered and the creature fell to the ground. Kratos continued moving forward without looking back. When the legionnaire with the chain swung it again, Kratos let it hit him in the arms. He wasn't worried, he also had some chains. As the undead lunged at him, Kratos slipped a loop of the chain from one of his swords around its neck. With a movement of his enormous arms he tore off his opponent's head. He dispatched the third with a simple punch that crushed his skull. He looked for more creatures to destroy, but saw nothing. He wasn't naive enough to believe that all the monsters were gone. Kratos wisely used the time he had gained to find a path among the sunken ships where he could cross the 50-odd steps that separated him from the merchant ship. A wooden statue bobbing in the distance caught his attention.